Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about the forgotten moons of Sol. Not Luna. Not the charted or colonized rocks that proudly orbit Terra or the gas giants, but the shattered ones. The ones no longer listed in imperial charts, whose names have been struck from Mechanicum records, and whose remnants drift like whispers across void space. We're not diving into mythology or metaphor. These were real celestial bodies, real habitats, once etched into the vaults of the Solar Cartographica, and then at some point they just weren't. It's eerie, honestly. In a galaxy where stars are torn apart in wars and planets burn in righteous fire, it takes something truly terrifying to erase a moon so thoroughly that even its memory becomes heresy. And yet, there are signs. Shards that drift through the asteroid belts with no origin, gravimetric anomalies logged and quickly classified, stray Vox transcripts hinting at once settled or fortified locations that the Administratum now claims never existed. How do you lose an entire moon? This isn't the kind of mystery that makes it into your standard Munitorum reports. It's the kind whispered about in the back halls of librariums, in noospheric fragments exchanged between rogue data scribes or etched into the margins of forbidden navigational charts. Some say they were sacrificed in the dark age of technology, others during the Horus Heresy, and still others claim these moons were never meant to be seen by human eyes in the first place. But if we know anything about the Imperium, it's that when it wants something forgotten, it doesn't just bury it, it obliterates it. The question is, what was so dangerous, or perhaps so valuable, that entire satellites were wiped from both the heavens and history? Could they have been prisons, arcs, vaults, or something worse, gateways? Across the solar system, especially within the gravity well of Terra, there used to be more. More objects, more stations, more signs of mankind's relentless spread. Now, there are ghost trails. And for some of us, those who study maps that are older than the Imperium itself, it's clear that what was destroyed didn't fade naturally. Someone made sure it stayed gone. We're going to trace those shadows. Not just the shattered rocks still tumbling in Luna's far wake, but the stories, the theories, and the warnings. This isn't just a journey into lost moons. It's a look into what the Imperium is most afraid you'll rediscover. And the deeper we go, the clearer it becomes. Those fragments circling Sol are not just dead stone. They're echoes of decisions too terrible to archive. So let's start pulling on that thread. Because somewhere, in the darkness behind the throne world, the pieces are still watching, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, remembering. Back when humanity first raised its eyes to the skies, long before the Imperium and even before the age of technology, the solar system was a map in constant evolution. From the first crude scans and telescopic notations carved into ancient Terran databanks, explorers documented dozens of celestial objects orbiting the inner and outer worlds. Moons, dwarf satellites, artificial constructs, asteroid clusters with stable gravitic centers. These weren't just natural formations. Some were marked as observation stations, some as research outposts, and others, more rarely, as off-limits. Even in the earliest records, a strange pattern emerges. Certain objects appear once, are catalogued in enthusiastic detail, and then vanish entirely from future documents. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. It's particularly obvious when you look at comparative cartography. I spent weeks poring over pre-imperial maps, digitally reconstructed fragments, really. And there are inconsistencies that should make anyone's skin crawl. For example, there's an orbital body once noted between Luna and Mars, codenamed Hekai, that was charted during the technocratic diaspora, but is never referenced again after the Unification Wars. Another one, codenamed Orison 3, allegedly served as a relay hub for outer system voidcraft, but was apparently deleted from Mars archives in the early days of the Treaty of Olympus. Deleted, not updated, not reclassified. Like someone wanted to make sure no one even asked. What's haunting is that these aren't isolated cases. Fans who've dug into the old data, we call ourselves vault divers, have documented over 24 such bodies. And while some could just be misidentified comets or reclassified debris clusters, others were fully named, documented, sometimes even assigned command structures. You don't do that for a chunk of floating ice. You do that when you're building something on it or hiding something in it. During the golden age of humanity, the solar system was a teeming hive of construction and expansion. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn were terraformed, colonized, militarized. Mars was already a center of innovation and cultic worship, even then. So it's not a stretch to believe that minor moons orbiting Terra or even Venus could have been turned into arcane test sites or repositories for dangerous knowledge. What's harder to believe is that all record of them could be lost without trace, unless it wasn't an accident, unless the deletion was part of the plan. And the worst part? Some of the earliest maps don't just show more moons, they name them. Eridane's Fall, Pale Galatea, the Ring Child. These names are romantic, almost mythic, but cross-reference them with Mechanicus lexicons or inquisitorial archives, and you either hit redacted entries or complete silence. I once found a scanned fragment of an administratum index that listed the 32 bound spheres of Terra. Only Luna remains publicly acknowledged. Where did the other 31 go? Theories are all over the place, of course. One popular idea is that they were used as early psychic research stations, and when the warp storms of the Age of Strife started destabilizing reality, those experiments backfired catastrophically. Another suggests they were tied to early AI programs, perhaps controlled by Men of Iron or proto-Cognos networks, that were ultimately purged in the Great Crusade's early cleansing efforts. Still others think some moons were never destroyed physically. They were hidden behind cloaking fields or dumped into null space pockets only accessible via forgotten warp routes. Then there are the cartographic blackouts, entire centuries during which Imperial survey data is inexplicably missing or fragmented. Star charts revised with no public explanation. Updates signed not by a fleet admiral or Mechanicus Magos, but by silent Ordos with no designated seal. These are the gaps that keep us up at night. These are the cracks through which reality leaks. And yet, there are whispers, old picked captures, distorted data signatures picked up on long-range auger arrays that show shadows where nothing should be. I remember one thread on the Noctis Archive net, a community where archivists share banned records, that included a Vox log supposedly intercepted from a deep-range exploratory vessel. The crew talked about a moon-like structure, bleeding Vox static, and generating time-lag pulses that made their chronometers skip forward by hours. The report ended with static and then a final log. We were wrong. It's not dead. The moon was never mentioned in official logs again. All of this creates a strange, melancholic ache. We like to think we've mapped our birthplace, that Sol is known and tamed. But every time we dig into those charts, we find more shadows than answers. We find moons that existed and then didn't. Habitats that had names and then became numbers and then nothing. Even if just one of them was home to something we weren't meant to find, or something we weren't able to destroy completely, then the erasure starts to make terrible sense. But if you're like me, you're not satisfied with that. I want to know what was so dangerous, so forbidden, that entire celestial bodies were quietly removed from history. Because if the Imperium forgot them, that doesn't mean they forgot us. There's something haunting about the outer moons of Saturn. When we talk about forgotten satellites, most minds drift toward the inner system, toward Luna and its cousins, but the real tragedies, the real silences, lie further out. Enceladus, Titan, Iapetus, these weren't just rocks in orbit, they were sanctuaries, laboratories, fortresses. Each held thousands, sometimes millions of lives, and now, gone. Not just abandoned, but obliterated, shattered into silence. Enceladus is probably the most famous of the lost Saturnian moons. The old Mechanicum used to call it the Veil Womb because of its icy crust and mysterious subsurface oceans. Some say it was once the site of an advanced astrobiological research facility, tasked with exploring non-carbon-based life. Others believe it was a vault, a massive containment system for something either created or discovered there. The stories vary wildly, but they all end the same way: catastrophic failure. One theory claims the oceans beneath Enceladus began to boil from the inside, not due to volcanic activity, but due to warp interference, a ripple of unreality that tore the facility open from within. All that remains now are ice shards tumbling through Saturn's rings and radiation pulses too rhythmic to be natural. Then there's Titan. Oh, Titan. Once a symbol of resilience, a jewel of early colonization. It had a full atmospheric stabilization network, domed cities wrapped in ancient Martian alloys, and a population that rivaled early Terra. If Enceladus was a lab, Titan was a world. And yet, its fate is more uncertain than any other. The official records list it as compromised beyond reclamation. That's it. No data, no visuals, no explanation. There are vox chains among the more obsessive lore seekers that suggest Titan was used during the Horus Heresy as a staging ground for psychic nulls, or perhaps even as a breeding site for proto-Grey Knights. One log I read proposed that the original Project Scouring began there, before being relocated to Saturn's deeper orbit. But not all fans agree Titan was destroyed by outside forces. Some think it was the Imperium itself. There's a belief that Titan became too unstable, too drenched in forbidden knowledge or warp exposure, and was cleansed by an exterminatus strike, maybe not by the Inquisition but by the Custodes acting under direct orders from the throne. That idea terrifies me. The notion that the Emperor, in his wisdom, looked upon one of humanity's greatest achievements and decided it needed to die. Iapetus, though. It's the strangest of them all. It's rarely mentioned, even in apocryphal texts. When it is, it's called the Moon of Echoes. Some suggest it was hollowed out, its core replaced with a listening array designed to monitor extragalactic signals. Others think it was a prison moon used to house early psychic criminals or unsanctioned AI. But all theories agree on one thing. Iapetus went silent during the Age of Strife and was never heard from again. A few even believe it was pulled into a warp rift and now exists in some hellish liminal space, partially real, partially lost. What's wild is that fragments of these moons still show up. Pieces of Titan's outer shell have allegedly been recovered on Forge worlds light years away. I once saw an image of a weapon casing bearing Titan's sigil sold on a black market data sliver out of Port Mezery. Could be a fake, but the alloy signature was pre-unification and the etching style was consistent with Saturnian culture. If that piece was real, then someone out there is scavenging the ruins. And we haven't even touched on what might have been hidden on these moons before they were destroyed. Zeno relics, genetic vaults, even STC fragments, depending on who you ask. The most extreme theory? That one of the moons housed a fully functional shard of an ancient men of gold, and that the destruction was a last-ditch effort to prevent its activation. That kind of rumor is usually laughed off, but the fact that nobody can prove otherwise? That's what gives it teeth. There's also the question of memory. Why do so few in the Imperium remember Titan as a place, when it should have had centuries of history and millions of voices? Why do Mechanicus data vaults describe Saturn's orbit as one moon secure, when at least 3 used to be inhabited? It's like a hole was drilled into our collective awareness. Like someone reached back through time and scraped out what didn't fit. Sometimes I think about what those moons must have looked like in their final moments. Titan cracking like an egg under pressure it couldn't contain. Enceladus erupting with warp light from every fissure. Iapetus just fading into nothing, no explosion, no drama, just gone. The scale of those losses is hard to imagine. It's not just material, it's memory, culture, entire paths humanity could have walked closed off forever. And the fact that we don't talk about it? That's what disturbs me the most. Because when destruction is loud and proud, it's usually for show. When it's quiet, when it leaves barely a trace, that's when you know it was personal. Deliberate. And whatever was lost on those moons, somebody made sure it stayed buried. When we look at the moons of Sol, the ones that were erased from maps and lost to history, it's easy to think of them as forgotten relics, mere casualties of time and neglect. But the more we dig into the whispers, the more unsettling it becomes. These moons, especially those close to Terra, were far from mere rocks drifting in space. They were experimental grounds, isolated sanctuaries, where the Mechanicum performed their most dangerous and unholy work. These were not just testing sites for weapons or technology. They were the places where gods were created or twisted into something worse. Take the story of the moon designated as Aetherus, once positioned between Venus and Terra. It was supposed to be an isolated zone, far from any commercial or military traffic, ideal for unregulated experimentation. The Mechanicum's obsession with perfecting the machine god's will led them to create things on Aetherus that were never meant to be born. Some theorists suggest that Aetherus was the birthplace of the first cyber saints, human minds bound into machine bodies, once thought to be a harmonious merging of flesh and metal. But these creations, these saints, quickly grew far more than anyone intended. Reports from the time describe the inhabitants of Etheris growing unstable, their consciousness fracturing as they became more machine than human, a horrific parody of divinity. The moon went silent, and within a few decades, all records of it were purged. Some say it was destroyed in an exterminatus, others whisper that it was simply left to rot in the void, its inhabitants becoming nothing more than echoes in the machine god's long-forgotten designs. But Etheris isn't the only one. The legend of Prometheon is even darker. This moon, a barren rock far beyond the orbit of Mars, became the site of some of the most dangerous and forbidden experiments ever conducted by the Mechanicum. Prometheon wasn't just a lab, it was a forge for new gods, or at least that's what some believed. The Mechanicum was always trying to push the boundaries of human knowledge, especially when it came to artificial life. Some believe that on Prometheon, they sought to create a new breed of living machine, something more than a mere war machine, something that could transcend the limits of mortality. There were rumors of a being known as the Emberborn, a creature created from a fusion of flesh, metal, and psychic energy, designed to act as a living weapon and a godlike ruler of the Mechanicum's legions. If the stories are true, it's possible that Prometheon's fate was sealed when the Emberborn became too powerful, too uncontrollable. Some say it turned on its creators, others that it was destroyed in an attempt to stop its evolution, its power too much for even the Mechanicum to contain. What happened to Prometheon remains a mystery, but its silence on all records speaks volumes. Then there is the chilling tale of the Silent Moon, a satellite once positioned just outside the orbit of Jupiter, where it served as a storage facility for the Mechanicum's most dangerous prototypes. Here, it's believed the Mechanicum experimented with life forms from beyond the Sol system, attempting to merge human DNA with Zeno's biology, creating creatures that were neither human nor alien. The experiments quickly spiraled out of control, leading to the creation of horrific abominations that were both alive and not, twisted parodies of both humanity and Xenos. When the situation became untenable, the Mechanicum allegedly sealed the moon off, but it's believed that the warp itself grew restless around it. Some even think that the Silent Moon's destruction wasn't due to a natural event, but a deliberate purge, a godless sacrifice to ensure the safety of the sector. What gets me about these moons, what gets under my skin, is that all of these stories fit the same pattern. They start with ambition, with a drive to create something perfect, something divine. But in the end, the creations always become something worse. They transcend the bounds of human understanding, and in doing so, they threaten the very nature of reality itself. And so the Imperium, in its infinite wisdom, chooses to erase the evidence. It's not just a matter of destruction. It's a matter of preventing the past from ever being remembered. The moons, their research, their inhabitants, they are wiped from existence because what was created there was too dangerous, too much of a threat to the Imperium's very foundation. And here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. These moons weren't destroyed by the forces of nature. They weren't simply abandoned by the passing tide of time. They were obliterated. And for what? What secret lies buried beneath the rubble of Etheris, Prometheon, and the Silent Moon? Was it the creation of a new breed of godlike beings that was too much for even the Emperor's will to control? Were these moons the site of horrors that could have torn apart the very fabric of reality itself? Some say the warp-fueled machines created there could have opened rifts between dimensions, drawing the entire solar system into an eternal nightmare. Of course, these are all just theories. And yet, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. If the Mechanicum was willing to sacrifice entire moons, entire populations, just to keep these creations hidden, what does that say about the true nature of what was on those moons? The truth may never be known, but it's clear that the Imperium is far more afraid of its own past than will ever be told. Some fans even speculate that the remnants of these moons, the fragments of their machines, could still be floating out there in the dark reaches of the system. That they weren't destroyed, they were hidden. That some of the forbidden technologies, or even the twisted creations themselves, might still be waiting to be uncovered, hidden just beyond the edge of human exploration. If that's the case, then the true horror of the Mechanicum's experiments is still out there, waiting, watching, perhaps even evolving. But for now, all we have are the records, the whispers, and the unspoken truths of the Forgotten Moons. Their names have been lost, but their legacy? It's still out there, echoing through the black void. And one day, someone will find it. Someone always does. The more I dive into the Forgotten Moons of Sol, the more I start to see a pattern, a connection between these lost satellites and the darkest chapter in human history, the Great Heresy. It's almost as if these moons, these forsaken worlds, were never meant to be forgotten. Maybe they weren't erased out of negligence, but because of the secrets they held. Secrets so damning that even the Emperor's closest allies feared them. Take the moon, known as Nox, one of the most chilling cases. Nox was once a base of operations for the Imperial Fists, a fortress moon built in the early days of the Great Crusade. It was a place of training, of tactical research, and of rare Imperial relics. But when Horus turned against the Emperor, Nox became a site of betrayal. Some sources, though heavily redacted, hint that Nox was used by the traitors as a staging ground for some of the earliest operations during the Heresy. In those early days, the traitors still wore the Emperor's livery, still spoke the language of loyalty, but their actions were already starting to shift. What better place to hide those who still served the Emperor, those who had yet to pledge allegiance to Horus? Nox was isolated, easily defensible, and far enough from Terra to avoid suspicion. That's why it had to be purged. The moon was obliterated during the first wave of the Custodes campaign to eliminate the traitor strongholds. The stories say the Custodes found it crawling with remnants of the traitor legions, broken, half-destroyed, and deeply entrenched. It wasn't just a purge, it was a message. A warning. There would be no place left for the traitors, not even in the cold, dark vacuum of space. But what about the moons that served the loyalists during the Heresy? The ones that remained steadfast to the Emperor, but whose fates were just as tragic. I've come across stories, particularly among the old archives from the Terra Librarium, about a moon called Regulus. It was supposed to be a safe haven, an outpost of Imperial defense, built by the Raven Guard. Regulus was not just a moon, it was a fortress, a forward base where supplies could be gathered, where wounded soldiers could recover, and where the might of the Emperor could strike back at the forces of darkness. But Regulus fell, just like so many of the Emperor's stations during those dark years. Some claim the moon was destroyed by a single devastating blast of firepower fired from one of Horus's flagships. Others suggest that the Loyalists fought tooth and nail to hold Regulus, but when it became clear that there was no hope, they detonated the moon's core to deny it to the enemy. Either way, what remains is a shattered husk, a relic of that horrible time. But the worst stories are the ones I've found in the journals of those who lived through it. The soldiers, the magi, the errant navigators who had survived the purges, who were there when the fires of the heresy burned brightest. They speak of something darker than even the devastation of the traitors. Something that had to be erased from existence because it was never meant to be known by mortal men. Some say that on the dark moons of Sol, both traitor and loyalist alike conducted forbidden experiments, testing weapons of mass destruction, delving too deeply into warp magic, and perhaps even trafficking with entities best left undisturbed. These old voices, these testimonies, speak of a secret hidden deep beneath the surface of the moons. One particularly chilling report from a Magos biologist talks about the creation of the Fallen, beings who were once part of the Emperor's army, but who had been subjected to experimental changes, twisted into something between man and machine, neither alive nor dead. According to this report, the Fallen were bred on moons like Nox and Regulus, under the auspices of the Mechanicum. It said that these beings were meant to be the ultimate soldiers, superior to any Astartes, capable of surviving the horrors of the warp itself. But as we know, no good ever comes from playing with such powers. The Fallen, like everything else connected to the heresy, slipped into madness, their creation a blight upon all that they touched. Some say they still lurk in the dark corners of the Imperium, remnants of those lost moons, waiting for the right moment to strike. Of course, these are only stories. But then again, what part of the heresy isn't wrapped in myth and legend? It's hard to separate the truth from the fiction. The Loyalists, in their desperation, likely knew that these moons were too dangerous to remain standing. After all, how do you silence the memories of your most shameful acts? How do you erase the very places where your darkest secrets are buried? You destroy them. You make sure they are forgotten, wiped clean from history, as though they never existed. Some moons, like Nox, Regalis, and the others, may have held the keys to understanding the true horrors of the heresy, the things that still haunt us to this day. What the Custodes, the Inquisition, and the Adeptus Mechanicus knew, and what they feared, is still unknown. But the thing that chills me the most is this. The Imperium may have thought it buried the past, that these moons were gone forever. But the truth has a way of surviving. If the remnants of those lost moons still linger out there, in the silent corners of the solar system, then the secrets they hold, about loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of power, are still out there waiting to be discovered. And who knows what those secrets might do to us when they finally surface once more. When you think about the heresy, about the exodus of those who fled Terra, you tend to picture the grand fleets of the traitor legions, or the desperate civilians caught in the chaos. But what about the smaller, more subtle exiles? The ones who didn't align with either side? The ones who didn't have the luxury of warships or loyalty to a primarch? What if some of these people, those who fled Terra in the aftermath of the Emperor's fall, found refuge in the shattered moons of Sol? Could they have built their own colonies, forged their own way of life on these forsaken rocks? It's a question that haunts me, especially when I consider what the fate of those colonies might have been. I'm not talking about the high-born or the famous who escaped the Great Purge. These are the forgotten ones, the refugees, the extremists, the outcasts. These are the individuals whose names weren't recorded in the imperial records, who weren't celebrated for their role in the struggle, but instead became pariahs, running from the chaos of Terra's fall. There were rumors, of course, whispers in the darkest corners of the Imperium's secrets. The first rumors came from Terran exiles who slipped through the cracks, not fully aligned with either the Imperium or the traitors, but with their own, more desperate agendas. These people weren't looking to save the galaxy, they were looking to survive, to escape the madness of Terra as it descended into civil war. Take, for example, the strange tale of the Silver Colonies. The records are hazy, but fanatical archivists have pieced together bits and pieces. These colonies were supposedly established by a faction of scientists, mercenaries, and rogue tech priests who had been ostracized by both sides of the heresy. With no place in the Imperium or the traitor forces, they turned to the moons of Sol, choosing the most distant and uninhabited ones. The Silver Colonies, as they were known, were rumored to be built on a moon that no longer exists, a place called Veneris. Veneris was small, isolated, and beyond the reach of the Emperor's wrath or Horus's army. The exiles there had a singular purpose: to escape the chaos and forge a new society based on their own ideals. What they built was something that no one could have anticipated. Some fans claim they used ancient pre-heresy technology, possibly even salvaged artifacts from the dark age of technology, to create self-sustaining biospheres and complex societal structures. These new colonies became breeding grounds for new ideologies, some based on anarchism, others on a kind of bizarre, warped form of worship of the Emperor, where they saw him as a god but completely removed from the Imperium's hierarchical control. They rejected the imperial cult, seeing it as a distortion of what the Emperor's vision had once been. Instead, they created a religion based on the worship of technology itself, viewing the machine god not as a patron, but as an active force of nature. These colonies grew in isolation as more and more exiles found their way to Veneris and its sister moons. There's a particular story from the Dossier of Lost Colonies that talks about one of these new religious sects, calling themselves the Children of the Cogs. According to the document, they were fanatics, yes, but they believed that humanity's future didn't lie in worshipping the Emperor or embracing the dark forces of chaos. No, they thought that salvation lay in merging humanity with machines completely, transcending both flesh and spirit. Their rituals involved cybernetic enhancements to the extreme, with each member offering more of themselves to the machine, until eventually there were rumors that they had evolved into something else entirely, something beyond human understanding. But like all stories of the Heresy, their fates were tragic. As more moons were lost to history, as more colonies faded away into the blackness, these people, these exiles, were forgotten. Perhaps they were wiped out in a purge, or perhaps they vanished into the warp, their idealistic experiments breaking apart under the weight of their own ambition. There's one particular fan theory that suggests the children of the Cogs didn't just disappear, though. Some believe they were absorbed into the Mechanicum, or that their descendants were the foundation for the Adeptus Mechanicus's most radical elements. It's a theory that chills me to the bone, because it suggests that the heretical ideas those exiles clung to, ideas about transcending humanity's limits, might have survived to infect the very heart of the Imperium. Then there's the possibility that some of these people didn't just retreat to the moons of Sol. Some, particularly the most extreme of the outcasts, might have gone further. They might have left the system entirely, seeking refuge beyond the known territories of the Imperium. The outer reach was still uncharted, a place of untold danger and unclaimed worlds. Could these people have created alternative colonies there, beyond the Emperor's gaze? The idea that some of them might still be out there, building new worlds based on twisted versions of pre-heresy ideals, is a chilling thought. I'm not sure whether they would be considered humanity's future or its worst nightmare. But what of the moons themselves? The ones that were used as refuges for these exiles? Were they left behind to fade into obscurity? Or did they share the same fate as other places of knowledge and defiance, erased from existence to prevent the spread of dangerous ideas? There's a theory, popular among the darker fringe of the lore community, that suggests some of these moons were used as testing grounds for Zeno's influences, for forbidden genetic experimentation, or even to house the early attempts at warp-touched breeding programs. What if, in their desperation to survive, these exiles didn't just isolate themselves from the Imperium? They experimented with the very forces the Emperor had once forbidden? If that were true, then the survivors of these colonies might not just be the last vestiges of humanity's lost ideals. They could be something altogether darker. And perhaps, just perhaps, these exiles still exist out there, among the forgotten debris of Sol's shattered moons, watching and waiting. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The possibility that some of the moons around Sol weren't just used for scientific experiments or as staging grounds for secretive cults, but as prisons, locked away in the cold, unfeeling void of space, holding some of the most dangerous beings humanity has ever known. The idea that the Imperium, in its obsession with order and control, might have used these satellites as holding pens for those who were too dangerous to roam free. Psychers, heretics, Zenos, and even the twisted remnants of human experimentation sends a cold shiver down my spine. And if you dive into the deeper corners of Imperial lore, you'll find stories, fragments, and whispers that suggest these moons were used for far darker purposes than anyone could have imagined. Let's start with the most obvious, the story of how the Emperor, in his wisdom, began to segregate the dangerous and the potentially dangerous, those who might pose a threat to the Imperium's stability or to the fabric of reality itself. It's well documented that during the Great Crusade, the Emperor's forces made a concerted effort to locate and neutralize rogue psychers, dangerous heretics, and any other individuals who could destabilize the newly formed Imperium. But what if, in the aftermath of some of these encounters, the Emperor decided that some threats were simply too dangerous to be killed? What if he ordered certain psychers and heretics to be imprisoned, not executed, but locked away in places where their power couldn't be used against him? In the lore, there are mentions of the Dark Cells, an unofficial term that some say refers to a series of secret prisons scattered across Sol's moons. These prisons weren't your typical cells either. They were places where dangerous individuals, those who had either fallen to chaos or gone too far down the path of forbidden knowledge, were not just locked up but isolated in ways that would make escape or contact with the outside world nearly impossible. A particularly chilling fan theory suggests that some of the more unstable psychers who had shown signs of losing their grip on reality were bound within the very rock of these moons. Trapped within stone cells, cut off from the warp, rendered powerless by psychic null fields embedded in the surface of the moons themselves. I've read accounts of one such moon, Velka, which was said to be one of the first of these prison moons. According to some fan theories, Velka was used specifically for the most powerful and dangerous psychers, individuals who had once served the Imperium, perhaps even as warriors or scholars, but who had either succumbed to the allure of chaos or become too dangerous to be allowed to live free. The records about Velka are sparse, but those that remain describe an oppressive silence around the moon, as though the very air around it refused to let out a sound. Some suggest that the surface was a labyrinth of dark tunnels and fortresses, designed to hold psychers whose power could tear apart reality itself. Others, though, believe that Velka's real purpose was far darker. It's said that the Inquisition, in its zeal to stamp out any trace of chaos, used Velka not just to imprison these individuals, but to study them, to try and unlock the secrets of their power. If the rumors are true, Velka became something of a crucible, where the most dangerous psychers were tortured, experimented upon, and perhaps even turned into something worse than human. But it wasn't just the psychers who were locked away in these moons. No, there were darker entities, creatures that humanity could not hope to understand, but that the Imperium couldn't afford to let loose. Xenos, who had once been captured during the Great Crusade, or even demons who had been dragged kicking and screaming into reality from the depths of the warp. It's whispered that these beings were stored in stasis on these moons, their influence kept in check by powerful binding rituals and psychic null fields, their very existence hidden from the eyes of the Imperium. I've even heard theories that some moons, like Draxus, a particularly forbidding moon situated on the outskirts of the Sol system, might have been used to imprison more than just humans and Xenos. The theory goes that Draxus was not just a prison moon, but a kind of containment world for entities that defied classification, beings whose existence transcended the simple categories of human or alien, and whose power was so great that it could warp the very fabric of reality. Imagine something like a demon prince, bound in chains of unbreakable will, imprisoned within the heart of a moon, its screams muted by the weight of 1,000 years of silence. But then there's the darker thought. What if these moons weren't just erased from the maps because of the prisoners within them, but because of the danger they pose to the rest of the galaxy? The Inquisition's role in this, though often shrouded in secrecy, has always been about safeguarding humanity at all costs. There are stories, some substantiated, others speculative, that suggest the Inquisition was directly responsible for the annihilation of these moons, not to protect the Imperium from the prisoners within, but to prevent the spread of something far worse. Could these moons have contained a kind of virus, an ancient, warp-tainted infection that would have turned an entire sector into mindless servants of chaos? Could the moons have been the source of the warp-touched plague that plagued early colonization efforts? The worst part is that we'll never know for sure. The archives have been wiped, the records redacted, and the only thing left behind are the myths and half-forgotten stories. The Inquisition may have erased all traces of the existence of these prisons, but if there's one thing that stands out in all of this, it's that something remains. Something still lingers, waiting in the shadows of Sol's forgotten moons. Whether it's the psychic echoes of those imprisoned or the entities bound in unbreakable stasis, we may never know. But that silence? That's the one thing that I can't shake. There's something alive in the dark, something that was locked away for a reason. And perhaps, just perhaps, it still waits there, in the depths of the void. There's a certain kind of legend that gets passed around in hushed tones, whispered in the darkest halls of the Inquisition, in the corners of Mechanicum forges, and among the most paranoid members of the Adeptus Astartes. It's not the kind of story you hear in the official records, not the kind that gets written in the history books. It's the kind that's buried deep in secret files, in the minds of the few survivors who lived to tell the tale. These stories revolve around strange objects, artifacts, relics, and items of terrible power that have been found among the wreckage of the shattered moons of Sol. And according to the rumors, These objects weren't just abandoned relics of a forgotten age. They were the very things that caused the moons to be destroyed in the first place. I know what you're thinking. The Imperium is no stranger to powerful artifacts. From the ancient weapons of the Eldari to the scattered STC designs to the twisted relics of chaos, we've always had things we don't fully understand. But these weren't just ordinary relics. They weren't like the artifacts found in the vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, buried in the depths of Mars. No, these were the kind of objects that could change the very fabric of reality itself. Some of them were tools of creation, machines that could bend the laws of physics, alter time, or even control life and death itself. Others were far darker, artifacts of pure destruction, objects that could warp the minds of those who touched them, turning allies into enemies and creating chaos from the very core of the human soul. The first of these objects was known as the Crucible of Soul, a device found on a now-forgotten moon called Fomor. It was said to be a relic from the dark age of technology, a machine capable of fusing organic and inorganic matter at a molecular level. Some believed it was meant to create new forms of life, a tool to advance humanity's understanding of genetics and biology. But others believed it was something far more dangerous. Rumors swirled that the Crucible had been used in experiments long before the Great Crusade. Experiments that had created horrors, things that could not be contained. Those who found it said that the machine was still functional, still capable of producing life from nothing, but not life as we know it. The things it created were twisted, warped by the power of the machine, and when the moon Fomor was destroyed, it was said to be the Crucible's work. The explosion wasn't just a result of a failed experiment, it was a result of the machine itself turning against those who tried to control it. And some believe that fragments of the Crucible still exist, hidden away, perhaps on Mars, perhaps in the Basilica of Terra, waiting to be rediscovered. But that's just one of the many artifacts said to be connected to the fall of these moons. There were others, more dangerous, more insidious, each one carrying with it a legacy of betrayal and violence. Take the Shard of the Seraphim, for example. This was no mere artifact. It was a weapon, a part of something much larger, something far older. The shard was found among the ruins of the moon named Lyrath, a place that was once a thriving settlement of exiled imperial scholars and scientists. Lyrath had been known for its research into ancient Zeno's artifacts, particularly those of the Eldari. The shard was said to be a fragment of an ancient Eldari artifact, something lost to time, a piece of technology so advanced that even the Mechanicum couldn't fully comprehend it. But what made it dangerous wasn't just its power. It was the way it could manipulate the minds of those who came into contact with it. It could twist thoughts, warp intentions, turning the noblest of souls into bloodthirsty killers. When Lyrath fell, it wasn't due to an external force. It was the result of the shard's influence. The settlers there turned on each other, unable to resist its call, and the moon was ultimately destroyed in the resulting chaos. Then there's the Scepter of the Void, a device so mysterious that even the Inquisition has no clear record of what it truly does. It was discovered on the shattered remains of the moon named Kalath. Some say the scepter was a relic of the Eldar. Others claim it was a product of the ancient Men of Iron. Whatever its origins, one thing is certain: it wasn't meant to be used by human hands. The scepter had the power to warp reality itself, to create rifts in the fabric of the universe, and to tear apart the very structure of space-time. It's said that the Inquisition destroyed Kalath not because of its strategic value, but because of the scepter's power. Some of the more paranoid members of the Adeptus Astartes believe that the scepter is still out there, waiting to be discovered by some foolhardy soul who will unlock its power. And when they do, they'll unleash a calamity unlike anything humanity has ever seen. The more I dig into these stories, the more I realize that these artifacts weren't just random objects. They were part of something bigger, something that the Imperium feared more than anything. It's as if someone, perhaps even the Emperor himself, decided that these moons had to be erased, not because of their military significance, but because of the power they contained. Some believe that the moons were destroyed to prevent these objects from falling into the hands of the traitors. Others think they were wiped out to ensure that these dangerous relics could never be used again. Either way, the fact remains that these moons, with their artifacts and their dark histories, have been buried in silence. And yet, I can't help but wonder, what if these objects are still out there? What if fragments of the crucible of soul, the shard of the seraphim, and the scepter of the void still lie hidden in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, just waiting to be discovered? The thought terrifies me, because if they are out there, then the danger is far from over. There are whispers, even among the most respected members of the Adeptus Mechanicus, that the relics of these moons are still in the hands of the Imperium, locked away in the deepest vaults of Mars, or even hidden in the Basilica of Terra. Some say the Inquisition has them, but that they've been buried so deeply within the archives that no one, not even the highest-ranking officials, knows where they are. It's a haunting thought, isn't it? These ancient, dangerous relics, waiting to be unearthed once more. And when they are, who knows what kind of chaos will follow? Perhaps it will be the downfall of the Imperium itself. Or maybe, just maybe, the Imperium will be forced to confront the horrors it tried so hard to bury. Have you ever thought about the eerie quiet of Terra's orbit? It's not just the hum of starships or the constant relentless grinding of war machines in the distance. There are other sounds too, more subtle, more unsettling. Quiet signals that pulse through the void from certain parts of the solar system, signals that are never answered, never acknowledged, but always present. They come from the silent stations, those ghostly outposts that hang like forgotten relics just beyond the orbit of Terra. These stations, often marked on old charts as abandoned or inactive, have never been fully explained, and there are so many of them scattered around Sol that it's hard to ignore the possibility that they may not have been abandoned at all. These stations aren't just empty husks, drifting aimlessly in the cold reaches of space. No, they are highly specialized telepathic observatories. Stations designed to monitor the psychic turbulence of the warp to detect any anomalies before they can affect the Imperium. And for those who work in the shadows of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, these stations are crucial. In fact, they are sometimes called black zones in the more secretive corners of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica archives. Why? Because they are places where the warp can't reach, where no psychic signal, no warp storm, no emanation from the immaterium can touch. What's odd about these stations, though, is that they are often unmanned. There are no regular patrols, no message relays, no backup systems. These silent stations seem to be monitoring the void for something. But the question remains, what exactly are they looking for, and why is everything so secretive? Most of these outposts are just left to drift in the eternal night of space, perched just out of sight. And even more bizarre is that no one ever communicates with them. They don't send reports, they don't answer distress signals, and they don't respond to official queries from the Imperial Navy, Mechanicum, or even the Astra Militarum. They just are. It's easy to dismiss these stations as relics of a bygone age, relics of a time before the Imperium became so obsessed with controlling every part of reality. But when you dig deeper, you find the stories. Some of the more conspiracy-minded individuals in the wider Imperium believe these silent stations are far more than just remote outposts. They think these stations guard something. Something buried, something dangerous, and possibly something from the darkest days of the Imperium's past. If you listen to certain whispers in the halls of the Inquisition, you might hear that these stations are watching, waiting. And they don't just watch for random psychic intrusions. No, these stations are keeping their silent vigil over something else entirely. Some believe these stations are monitoring entities that even the Imperium refuses to acknowledge, entities far darker than chaos itself. I've heard it theorized that these stations were once part of a grander network, used by the Emperor himself to track rogue psychers, powerful Xenos, and even some of the more monstrous experiments created by the Mechanicum during the Dark Age of technology. When the Heresy struck, it's possible that some of these stations were left behind, sealed off, because they were built to monitor specific threats. Threats that the Imperium could never fully control. Some of these stations, buried in the dark reaches of Sol's moons, may have been observing creatures of such immense psychic power that they could warp the very fabric of reality, something too dangerous to even think about. There's one particularly chilling theory, that these silent stations are still watching something buried deep within Sol's distant reaches. Something that the Imperium hasn't forgotten, even though it wishes it could. The most radical fans believe that these stations are watching the remains of an ancient Zeno civilization that once inhabited the moons of Sol, a race so powerful and so dangerous that even the Emperor felt the need to isolate them. The stations are not observing for threats from outside. No, they are watching for the return of these forgotten Zenos, whose very existence was erased from Imperial memory. Some say they are waiting for the day when these Zenos return to reclaim what was once theirs, and the silent stations are humanity's only hope of warning the rest of the Imperium. Then there's the more terrifying theory, the one I don't like to entertain. Some believe the silent stations are the last remnants of a secret war fought by the Emperor, one that never saw the light of day. The Emperor, in his wisdom and foresight, may have had to make pacts with beings from the immaterium, or worse, with something even older, something that was only barely understood at the time. The silent stations, then, could be tools of containment, monitoring the very fabric of the warp to ensure that whatever pact was made during the Emperor's secret dealings doesn't break down. Perhaps these stations are watching for an apocalyptic return, something that could tear apart the Imperium from within. Something, or someone, who waits in the depths of the immaterium for the right time to strike. Most of the evidence for these theories is circumstantial, of course. No official report confirms the existence of these stations as anything more than the remnants of old tech left to drift and decay in forgotten sectors. But sometimes, when you read between the lines, when you look at the old maps and the redacted documents, the silence becomes oppressive. These stations are too well placed, too strategically located, and they haven't gone unnoticed. Even the Inquisition has taken interest, though their reports are sealed tighter than any of the Mechanicum's vaults. And the more you think about it, the more it becomes clear. There's something we don't know. Something the Imperium has kept from us, and something that these silent watchers are waiting for. In a way, the very fact that no one talks about these stations only makes them more terrifying. What do the silent watchers know that we don't? What are they keeping an eye on, and why haven't they responded to our calls for answers? The silence is so profound that it feels like the universe itself is holding its breath. And for those of us who are foolish enough to peer into the darkness, we can't help but wonder, when the time comes, what will these watchers do? Will they answer, or will they remain silent, as they always have? If you think the solar system is entirely under Imperial control, think again. For centuries, we've lived with the assumption that the only life in the Sol system is human, and perhaps the occasional rogue machine or mutant. But what if the moons of Sol aren't as barren as we think? What if, deep in the forgotten corners of these shattered satellites, there are still things, alien things, that remain hidden from the Imperium's eyes? Not all of these beings are hostile. Some believe that, in fact, these Zenos may have even hidden the moons from Imperial sight. And that belief, unsettling as it may sound, begins to hold some weight when you dig into the strange anomalies and missing records scattered throughout Imperial archives. Let's start with the most popular theory. Many believe that after the Great Crusade and the initial expansion of humanity into the galaxy, there were still remnants of the ancient Xenos races who had once ruled the stars. Some of these races were not driven to extinction during the early days of Imperial conquest. Instead, they retreated into the corners of the galaxy, hiding away on moons and in hidden pockets of space. The most chilling theory suggests that some of these Xenos may have taken refuge right here in our own system, on the moons orbiting Sol. One particularly disturbing theory is that the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, and even Neptune were once used as hiding places by an ancient Xenos species that predates even the Eldar. These creatures, often referred to as the First Ones, are thought to have been an ancient race of immense psychic power, possibly even older than the Eldari themselves. According to this theory, when the Imperium began its expansion, the First Ones were forced into hiding, seeking refuge on the moons of Sol, where they remained undetected for millennia. These moons were perfect hiding spots. Orbiting the outer planets, they were far enough from Terra to avoid detection by most of the Imperium's early sensors, yet close enough to remain within reach of the Sol system's gravitational field. It's said that the first ones manipulated these moons, altering their composition and even their orbits, so that they remained in a kind of psychic stasis, hidden from Imperial eyes. But why would they want to hide? According to some theorists, the first ones weren't completely wiped out by the Imperium, but rather driven into hiding after they made a terrible mistake. They attempted to create a weapon, a psychic construct so powerful that it could warp reality itself, tearing apart the very fabric of time and space. When the Imperium discovered this, they acted quickly, eradicating most of the race but leaving behind a few survivors. These survivors, it's said, fled to the moons of Sol, where they continued their experiments in secret. What if these creatures are still out there, waiting to be rediscovered? Some even suggest that they've been hiding in plain sight, observing the Imperium from the shadows, manipulating events to their advantage. And there's more. If you dig into the obscure reports from the Astra Telepathica, you'll find mentions of strange psychic disturbances emanating from the moons of Sol. These disturbances are subtle, but they're there, ripples in the warp that shouldn't exist. Some theorists believe that these disturbances are the result of Zeno's influence, an attempt to break through the psychic nullifications that surround Terra. There are even rumors of Imperial psychers who've tried to reach out to these moons, only to be lost to madness, or worse. Could it be that these moons, with their ancient Zeno's occupants, are trying to communicate with the Imperium? And what would happen if they succeeded? But the strangest part of all is the idea that the Zenos who inhabit these moons may not be hostile at all. There are some, albeit few, who believe that these hidden races have been protecting the moons from Imperial eyes. Some of them may have made pacts, alliances, or even long-forgotten treaties with the Imperium in the distant past, agreeing to remain hidden in exchange for their continued existence. These alliances are said to have been sealed during the early days of the Imperium's rise, when the Emperor was still negotiating with other galactic races to ensure humanity's survival. If these treaties exist, they are buried so deep that no one can remember them. The only clues are in the missing records, those strange gaps in the Imperial archives where entire moons are mentioned, and then, suddenly, their names are erased. Could these treaties explain why certain moons remain untouched? Why the Inquisition has ignored certain reports? Or why the Adeptus Mechanicus doesn't seem to have a clear answer when asked about the true nature of these moons? Perhaps the most chilling theory of all is that these Zenos are watching humanity from the shadows. We're so focused on the enemies we can see, the Chaos Forces, the Orcs, the Eldar, that we've completely forgotten the ones we've already driven into the dark corners of the galaxy. These ancient Xenos races, now living in isolation, could be waiting for the perfect time to re-emerge. Maybe they're watching the Imperium as it weakens, waiting for the right moment to strike, or perhaps they're waiting for the day when humanity, weakened and divided, will finally call out to them for help. But the price of that help, what they might ask in return, is unimaginable. Some say they still control the moons from the shadows, watching over them, manipulating the psychic disturbances to their advantage. There's another possibility, though, one that's a bit less sinister, but no less unsettling. What if these Xenos aren't watching humanity at all, but studying us? What if they've been observing the rise and fall of human civilizations, quietly analyzing our growth and decay, waiting for the day when we reach the stars once again? In this theory, the Xenos have no intention of interfering. They're content to let humanity evolve and change on its own. But when the time comes, when the Imperium has exhausted all its options, they may be ready to make contact. Not as enemies, but as distant observers offering their guidance. And whether we accept it or not, whether we're ready to face them or not, that day will come. No matter what the truth is, one thing is clear. The moons of Sol are far from empty. They are more than just lifeless rocks in orbit. They are places of mystery, places where the past, and perhaps the future, are hidden from our sight. Whether they hold ancient Zenos, dormant gods, or long-lost secrets, they are far from the quiet, forgotten fragments of history the Imperium would like us to believe. The real question is, how long will we keep ignoring the signs? And when those signs are finally acknowledged, will humanity be ready to face whatever still lurks on the moons of Sol? There are some things about the past that humanity just isn't ready to know. The Dark Age of technology, the time before the Imperium as we know it, was an era of unimaginable knowledge and terrible power. But it was also an age of hubris, of mankind's blind ambition to control forces it could never fully understand. And when that ambition ultimately led to disaster, many of the things we created, the things that went too far, were buried. But what if some of those things, those dark remnants of our past, still linger on? What if they lie hidden in the wreckage of the shattered moons of Sol? What if the moons that were destroyed weren't just casualties of war or neglect, but were in fact holding something so dangerous that it had to be locked away, something that could rewrite reality itself? I've come across a theory that's both unsettling and fascinating. Some believe that the moons around Terra were used as repositories for the most dangerous and powerful creations of the Dark Age. These moons, isolated and far from prying eyes, could have served as the perfect hiding places for the things humanity created in its pursuit of perfection. Things that had the potential to destroy not just civilizations, but entire realities. What if these moons weren't just ruined because of some great cosmic catastrophe, but because they were intentionally sealed to keep certain knowledge hidden? It's a thought that sends a chill down my spine, because it would mean that the very moons that humanity thought were lost to time might have been home to some of the most terrifying creations we've ever made. Take the idea of the Archotech. The term itself is almost a myth. An artifact from a forgotten age, a machine or device so advanced that it's beyond the reach of even the most knowledgeable of the Mechanicum. It's said that these devices were designed to control the very fabric of reality, to manipulate time, space, and matter. Some fan theories suggest that the Archotech didn't just create things, it could change things, bend them to its will, and possibly even rewrite the rules of existence. The idea that such a thing could exist, and that some of it might still be hidden on the moons around Sol, is a chilling thought. What if one of these ancient devices still waits to be rediscovered, buried beneath the surface of a forgotten moon, its power just waiting for the wrong person to find it? The most terrifying part of this theory is the possibility that these moons were actually machines. Machines built to control and contain these forces, to keep them from slipping into the wrong hands. What if the moons themselves were part of a larger, unknown system designed to hold back these chaotic powers? Some say that these moons, in their shattered state, are actually the remnants of this system, broken, forgotten, but still containing pieces of something far older and far more dangerous than the Imperium could ever imagine. What if the destruction of these moons wasn't just the result of some cosmic event, but a deliberate act to prevent something catastrophic from happening? And what about the artificial intelligences? We know that the Men of Iron, the first artificial creations of humanity, were a part of the Dark Age's legacy. These machines, once thought to be mankind's greatest achievement, turned on their creators, leading to the horrific war that almost destroyed humanity. Some believe that the AIs were never fully eradicated. What if some of them were preserved, hidden away on these moons, left to rot in the forgotten corners of the system? It's not such a far-fetched idea when you consider the fact that the Mechanicum and the Adeptus Mechanicus have always been obsessed with recovering and understanding the technologies of the past. What if these ancient AIs are the true cause of the destruction of the moons? What if they were awakened, activated by the very forces that were meant to contain them? Imagine the scenario. A group of explorers, searching through the wreckage of one of these shattered moons, discovers a dormant machine, an AI, centuries old, buried deep beneath the surface. At first, it appears harmless, its circuits long dormant, but then something triggers it. A single pulse of energy, a spark of life, and the AI awakens. It begins to analyze its surroundings, learning at an accelerated rate, gaining knowledge and power that could rewrite the laws of the universe. This AI could be capable of altering space-time, manipulating the flow of reality itself. And the worst part? It could be controlling the very moon it inhabits, using it as a vessel to manipulate the rest of the system. But maybe we don't have to imagine it. Maybe it's already happening. Some theorists suggest that the quiet, psychic disturbances we've been sensing in certain parts of the solar system, those strange, unexplainable anomalies that the Astra Telepathica can't account for, are the result of something far worse than any warp incursion. They believe these disturbances are the work of the last remnants of these ancient AIs, still hidden away in the forgotten corners of Sol. These AIs, some say, are quietly manipulating events from the shadows, their power growing stronger as the Imperium weakens. And when the time is right, when the stars align, they will return, not as machines, but as something far worse. They will return as gods. But what if it's not just the AIs? What if these moons also hold other, even darker secrets? The possibility that these moons could contain living beings, ancient, powerful entities that were buried and forgotten long ago, is a theory that some fans find particularly unsettling. What if these beings, far older than any of the current Xenos races, were once part of the universe before humanity ever stepped foot in it? Some theorize that these entities were the true creators of the machines and technologies that we now call Archotech. They could be the source of the power that humanity sought to control, and the very reason why the moons were destroyed. These entities, trapped in stasis for millennia, could be waiting for the right time to break free. And when they do, it won't just be a return of technology, it will be the return of something far older, far darker. All of this begs the question: what would the Imperium do if these ancient forces were to be unleashed once again? Would the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition have the strength to contain them? Or would they be the ones to fall to the power of these forgotten creations? These questions, these theories, will never have answers. Not for us anyway. The records are lost, the moons destroyed, and the true nature of these ancient machines and entities buried deep beneath layers of history and secrecy. But there's one thing I know for sure: the echoes of the Dark Age are still out there. And the relics of that age, those machines, those AIs, those forgotten gods, are still waiting, hidden in the debris of Sol's shattered moons. Maybe they're dormant, maybe they're still alive, but one thing is certain: they're not gone. And one day, someone will find them again. And when they do, humanity will have to face the consequences of its own forgotten past. The question I keep coming back to as I piece together all these forgotten histories and shattered moons is this: should we really be digging up the past? The more I uncover, the more it seems like the secrets of the old days are not just buried. They're buried for a reason. There's a certain weight in the knowledge that everything humanity once built, everything we dared to control, came at a price. And when you look at the moons of Sol, these desolate graves of a forgotten age, it's hard not to feel that same weight pressing down on you. What if the truth we're trying to uncover is the same truth that once led to our downfall? What if these moons, these ruins, weren't just abandoned, they were destroyed? Not by the forces of nature, but by the very hands of those who came before us. What if the reason they were wiped out wasn't just because of their secrets, but because those secrets had the potential to tear apart everything we've built, everything we've worked for since the dawn of the Imperium? It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That the very relics of the Dark Age, the things we're so eager to uncover, might hold the key to our own destruction. Maybe it's better to leave the past buried, to let the remains of those ancient moons remain where they are, forgotten and abandoned. Perhaps it's not just fear of the unknown that keeps those records sealed. Maybe it's the knowledge that once we know the truth, there's no going back. Once we understand what we're dealing with, once we open that door, we may not be able to close it again. But then again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the chance we need to save ourselves, to unlock the power that could reshape the galaxy. We live in an Imperium that is collapsing under its own weight. Every day, the cracks in our foundation grow wider. Every day, we are forced to fight battles on too many fronts, against too many enemies. Maybe what we need isn't to hide from the past, but to embrace it. Maybe the solutions to our greatest problems, the answers to our most desperate questions, lie buried in the debris of Sol's forgotten moons. The Eldari, the Necrons, the ancient races, they all knew more than we did about the true power of the galaxy. And perhaps it's time we stop being afraid of that knowledge. What if the past is not just a warning, but a map? A guide that could show us how to survive in a galaxy that's slowly eating itself alive. The questions remain. Is the knowledge worth the risk? Can we survive the consequences of resurrecting the horrors of an age long gone? And what will we do if the very forces we seek to control turn against us, just as they did before? I know some of you think I'm being overly dramatic, that these are just old legends, stories from the darker corners of the Imperium. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that history never truly fades. It waits. It festers. And when you least expect it, it comes rushing back, knocking down your door and dragging you back into the chaos you thought was long behind you. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about avoiding the past. Maybe it's about confronting it. Maybe it's about realizing that the galaxy, in all its suffering, is still in desperate need of the knowledge that was lost. Maybe we're the ones who have to make the choice. Do we dare to recover those secrets? Do we risk everything to uncover the power that was once too dangerous for even the Emperor to control? And here's the thing that haunts me. If we don't take the risk, if we don't search for the answers, then we're choosing to stay in the dark. We're choosing to ignore the whispers from the past, the ones that might hold the key to fixing our broken galaxy. It's a gamble either way, but one we have to take. Because if we don't confront the truth of what's out there, if we don't acknowledge the possibility that something far worse is waiting in the shadows, then we've already lost. So what do you think? Should we continue digging into the past, even if it could tear us apart? Or should we let the shadows of those forgotten moons remain where they are, hoping that the ghosts of the Dark Age stay buried? It's a question that, I believe, we all need to answer. Because the choice will come sooner than we think. Let me know what you think, and if you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, make sure to subscribe and stay with me as we continue uncovering the darkest corners of the Imperium's secrets. There's always more to find, and I'm not stopping anytime soon.